Welcome everyone to the Living Room Lecture Series here at Historic Locust Grove, from our living room to yours. We're so pleased that you are all with us today. My name is Hannah Zimmerman and I am the Marketing and Communications Director at Historic Locust Grove. And we're delighted today to have Susan Reigler and Peggy Stevens join us to talk about their new book, Which Fork Should I Use with My Bourbon, which I'm so excited about. As you may know, it is Derby Week here in Louisville. 2020 has the dubious honor of having 2 Derby weeks this year. So we're very excited to have our 2 experts with us today. And before we hear from them, let's hear from Locust Grove Executive Director, Carol Ely. Hello, Carol.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you. Just a few updates. We're continuing to plan our events and tell people about them one by one rather than rolling out a year's programs in advance as we usually do. You know, often I'll know in September exactly where I'll be on a given day in May, but not so this year. However, Hannah has worked on redoing our web page. It's a slow process, but the front page now has better access to our events, so you'll be able to find out more about what's going on. We can tell you, though, there will be no antiques market at the end of this month. However, there will be a book sale, so watch for details about that. We have just decided, I hope I'm not stealing anybody's thunder here, but the market fair will also be an online event. It will be virtual, and that actually has an advantage in that people can participate who normally don't travel to Kentucky to be part of reenactor events. So we're hoping that we'll be able to include people on the East Coast, Rebel War reenactors. So that will be virtual, and so you'll get more details about that. And we expect, but haven't made the final call yet, that our Christmastide event will also be online. So we are getting ready, though, to start construction on the facilities we've been talking about for so many years, a pavilion, so we'll have outdoor facilities. We're talking now with the high bidders, or the best bidders, let's call them that, and hope to have a groundbreaking pretty soon. So things continue to proceed. We're also really happy to announce that we received a grant from the Fund for the Arts, their Cultural Louisville Recovery Grants, which were given to organizations that they feel are key to the essence of Louisville and should survive this very difficult time. So that will help us get through this year. So we're very pleased and honored to have that. If you are a member of Locust Grove, we're looking at new ways to keep you happy during this time when it may be difficult for you to visit. So when you get your membership renewal, we might make it a little sweeter for you to continue to be part of Locust Grove. So please consider renewing. And we're also coming up on a fundraising day, the Give for Good Louisville Day, and we'll be also flooding you with information about that pretty soon. So we are continuing to work to be a better and more interesting and more exciting place during the pandemic and after we emerge from whatever our new normal is. But it's great to have Susan and Peggy with us today. Susan particularly has been such a great friend to Locust Grove through the years. Peggy is a new friend to me, but glad to see you here. Susan practically grew up at Locust Grove. I don't know if you're planning to get into your early memories here, but was the force behind us creating our farm distillery recreation, which has taken us into a really deep dive in the history of early distilling and its relationship to agriculture and economy and the enslaved people of early Kentucky. So that's been just such an exciting interpretive path for us. So it's really great to have the 2 of you here today. And now I will stop talking so that we can hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Carol. I do want to highlight just a couple things that Carol mentioned. Our farm distillery is very excitingly going to have a historic mash on September 12th. So if you've ever wanted to see a whiskey mash made the way it would have been 200 years ago, you'll have that opportunity on September 12th, and you are finding out first. It goes online as soon as this program is as soon as this program is over, so you get to find out early. I'll put all the links in the chat. And also, we love our members. So please, if you are a member or thinking about becoming a member, you can always let us know how we're taking care of you and making sure that you are happy with your membership at Locust Grove, as happy as we are to have you. We're certainly very excited to have Peggy and Susan with us today. Peggy and Susan, are you ready to be introduced?
Most certainly are.
All right, I'm gonna go in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Peggy Stevens. Peggy Stevens, in both career and personal life, has devoted herself to 30 years of hospitality, entertaining, and developing spirit brand destinations. A master bourbon taster who is also a certified etiquette, image, and professional speaker, she produces one-of-a-kind experiences for both people and places. Because of her signature style, expertise, and creativity, she is retained by companies to seek out the strategic essence of image and brand culture, and was inducted into the 2019 Bourbon Hall of Fame and 2020 Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame for those efforts. She's the only female in the world to be inducted to both Hall of Fame awards. She began her career in hospitality and marketing with Hyatt Hotels Corporation, and then moved to Brown-Forman Corporation to lead a newly developed travel and event planning department. While at Brown-Forman, she was also given the opportunity to move into the new frontier of experiential marketing, where she assimilated and directed an impressive portfolio of wine and spirit brand destinations and works with such iconic brands as Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, Bourbon, Southern Comfort, Fetzer, and Sonoma-Cutrer Vineyards. She has been called the Oprah of whiskey entertaining and a lifestyle maven, and she's represented Kentucky for such notables as Julia Child, Bobby Flay, and the Prince of Spain. In 2011, she created the Bourbon Women's Association, the first female consumer group in the industry to celebrate and support Kentucky's signature product with a multi-city platform for women. Kentucky was one of the originators for the conception and strategic development of the iconic Kentucky Bourbon Trail, which has become a global sensation for the spirits industry. Because of her accomplishments, she was given the prestigious Networking Award by the Kentucky Distillers Association in 2016 for making a difference in the industry for women. Peggy has authored 2 books, Professional Presence, a 4-part guide to building your personal brand, and the first chef collaborative bourbon and culinary book, The Culinary Cocktail Tour. Her new book, written with Susan Reigler, Which Fork Do I Use With My Bourbon?, hit the shelves in May 2020. She's a contributing food and spirits writer for American Whiskey Magazine and entertaining editor for Bourbon Plus magazine. She also serves as a spirits judge for the American Distilling Institute and is on the faculty of Moonshine University. Welcome, Peggy. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Susan Reigler. Among award-winning writer Susan Reigler's books are Kentucky Bourbon Country, The Essential Travel Guide, The Essential Bourbon Cocktail Book, The Bourbon Tasting Notebook, and The American Whiskey Tasting Notebook. Her newest book, co-authored with Peggy Stevens, is Which Fork Do I Use With My Bourbon? Setting the table for tastings, foods, pairing, dinner, and cocktails, now on shelves near Locust Grove Museum stores near you. From 1992 to 2005, Susan Reigler was a restaurant critic and beverage columnist for the Louisville Courier-Journal. Currently, she's a contributing writer to Bourbon Plus, American Whiskey Magazine, for which she writes whiskey notes and ratings, Leo Weekly, and is bourbon columnist for Food and Dining. Reigler is past president of the Bourbon Women Association and has hosted tastings and been featured in whiskey festivals throughout the United States, including in Chicago, New Orleans, Louisville, and Smithfield, Virginia. She is currently president of the Kentucky chapter of Les Dames d'Escoffier International, an organization of women culinary professionals, and she is a certified executive bourbon steward, a member of the Order of the Writ, and a graduate of Indiana and Oxford universities. We're so pleased to have you with us today, Susan and Peggy. There's no better credentials out there, so take it away.
Thank you. And you forgot to mention I was caretaker at Locust Grove for 5 years. So.
I did. You know, you left that out of your biography, and I almost added it because my office was your living room. So
that's exactly right. I recognized it on our Zoom meeting this week. So it was indeed. Absolutely. Right. Well, welcome everyone. So happy to have all of our bourbon enthusiasts with us today. I hope everybody has associated with Locust Grove and enjoys bourbon has had a chance to visit the recreated distillery at Locust Grove. I think Brian Cushing is doing a wonderful job with that. It's really fascinating to see the process, and especially if you visited any of the big commercial distilleries now, the contrast between the farm distillery, how most whiskey was made in the United States up until about the Civil War, and how it's made now. I think it's fascinating that Locust Grove really is the only place besides Mount Vernon that shows, doesn't just tell, but actually shows that piece of bourbon history, and people can see that. So very exciting to do the historic mash on September 12th. I think that's terrific. So looking forward to that. I hope you have a nice cool day for that too, because it's pretty hot in there with that wood fire and that mash tub. So that's pretty tough. So anyway, today we are going to walk you through several things about bourbon. One of them, of course, will be pairing bourbons with foods or drawing out flavors from bourbons using specific foods. But let's just first talk a little bit about bourbon styles. We're doing 3 distinct styles of bourbon today, and Peggy and I chose these on purpose so we would have this variety. But what we are doing is a very traditional bourbon, one with a traditional mash bill, which is predominantly corn, and you probably all know that bourbon has to be at least 51% corn in its grain recipe. So it's we're doing Old Forester, which is 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley. Then there are also a whole class of bourbons known as the wheated bourbons. Sometimes they're called wheaters, if you're really on the inside dope with the bourbon community. And the wheater that we've chosen is Larceny, which is made by Heaven Hill. And Larceny has, not quite sure exactly what their mash bill is. That Heaven Hill has been a little secretive about their proprietary mash bills, but they're, you know, it's a very good slug of wheat that goes into that. And I think you're going to find that that's going to kind of sweeten up the nose and the palate a little bit. Because if you think about the difference between rye bread and wheat bread, or rye crisp crackers and wheat thins, that'll tell you the sort of difference that putting wheat in your bourbon brings to it rather than the rye. And then finally, we're going to do a relatively new category of bourbons. This is called the finished bourbon. And in fact, in a story that was published, that I wrote today, published in Leo Weekly today, talks about some of these finished whiskeys. And probably the one that's best known at the moment, and one of the first, was Angel's Envy, because it is aged regularly like a regular bourbon. And it also happens to have the same mash bill as Old Forester, because the company originated with Lincoln Henderson, who was a retired Brown-Forman master distiller. But after the initial aging, the whiskey is put in a secondary barrel, a second barrel, which had once held port wine. And so it has a port wine finish to it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So anybody have questions so far? We're watching the chat room, and we're happy to sort of address those. And
I was just going to add something, Susan, to that, because Susan was great going over the different styles. And just so you can kind of appreciate what the master distiller does, you know, this is one of the very important variables that they have to make decision. So it really becomes an art when you think about balancing all of those grains and what they will finally do, you know, once you're marrying it with yeast and you go through the fermentation process. So if you really think about the very precise percentages that master distillers, you know, labor over, it's pretty fascinating. It's like having great chefs in a kitchen deciding exactly the right amount of ingredients.
Absolutely. In fact, it just occurred to me, I may have the Larceny mash bill here somewhere that they've given me. So I will look that up in the course of our conversation today, and then you can get an appreciation for that. In case you know, another kind of fascinating thing to do, if any of you are bakers, is try the different proportions of grain recipes that are in some of these different bourbons, and taste the difference in some bread that you bake from those proportions in the mash bills. So that's kind of fun, and to see the real difference between the traditional rye secondary grain, and the wheat. So can't do my, maybe you could add some port to your batter and that would help you with the Angel's Envy. I don't know, but just an idea.
And I think what Susan and I are always fascinated too is when new brands come on, and especially some of our Texas whiskeys, you know, when they're adding blue corn or what is it that Jephthah Creed adds? The red
Bloody
corn.
Butcher. It's a
Bloody Butcher corn.
So
So
even
even
mash, which is really crazy. You go to the distillery and the mash is pink instead of yellow.
exactly. So that's really the innovation now, is really thinking about not only just putting 51% corn in, but different varietals of corn. And I find that really fascinating because it really makes a difference in the flavor.
It does. And of course, being a Kentucky product, the distillers here almost entirely source their corn from Kentucky. And in fact, every single ear of corn grown in Shelby County is made into bourbon, which I think is pretty ironic for a county that was dry up until just a few years ago. But that's the story about Shelby County's corn. Okay, so Peggy, you want to start with our Old Forester?
Sure. You know, before we kind of dive in, Susan and I just wanted to share some tips on how you can taste just like an expert, but it also gives you some elements so that you can really understand the flavors a little bit better. And I think that's part of the catalyst of why Susan and I wrote the book, because we always had so many people when we would travel around to different whiskey shows and conferences and seminars and, you know, our beloved Bourbon Women Association, and they would come up and ask us, well, how do I do this at home? How did you learn how to nose it like that or taste it like that? And so Susan and I decided, you know, we really need to share all of the tricks of the trade, because there's no reason, if you're a bourbon enthusiast, a bourbon lover, that you can't enjoy this in your own home. So I'm just going to start with the 4 ways to judge a bourbon, and Susan and I are going to kind of go back and forth on some tips that we've learned along the way that has really helped us. But the first is the appearance of bourbon. You know, we always look, and I always tilt my glass, no matter what glass you have, as long as it's not beveled or, you know, you can at least see through it. And we always look at the color, because I always like a rich amber color with lots of sparkle, lots of bounce. You know, the sunlight just catches it so you can see the bronze highlights of it. But that's what you want, is more clarity. Because when you see a lot of oiliness or particles, etc., you know, that's when you know maybe that the filtration didn't work very well. But that's essentially a beautiful amber color is the appearance. And then I have always been taught on the nosing piece, you know, we're not like those wine folks that, you know, dig the nose down to the glass, you know, and dig in there, because of the alcohol vapors can really take you back. And so I always like to bring it in a little bit to the side. Some people enjoy kind of keeping their mouth open a little bit as they nose it, because it helps their olfactory senses. I just take very short puffs of air, and you can nose just really freshness, you know, and then start to delineate on some of the flavors that you might be nosing, you know. So you kind of mentally go through, do I nose spice, sweet, savory, earthy? And when you kind of break it down like that, it truly helps. Now, Susan, do you want to share a tip on a taste, and then I'll tell them a little bit about Old Forester?
Sure, yeah. There's another technique, and really the only wrong way is to actually put your face down in it and take a big sniff, which is just what Peggy was saying, because especially if you're dealing with a barrel-proof bourbon, it can not only be counterproductive, but downright painful. So don't do it that way. But Old Forester is 86 proof, so it's not too heavy a hitter. In fact, we don't really have any heavy hitters here today. But one of the things that I like to do is take, again, I would keep my mouth open a little bit, take an initial nosing, then I turn my head and blow away the alcohol, and then I nose again. And I find that means that you have access to more of the aromatics too that are coming off the glass. You'll notice we're both using Glencairn tasting glasses. These are developed in Scotland. In fact, I think Hannah and Carol and Brian, I think Locust Grove needs to be selling some Locust Grove signature Glencairn glasses in the shop. Just
We're working on it.
cool. Okay, good to know. But it was developed because the wide base allows the aromatics in the whiskey to, of course, develop for Scotch whiskey, the aromatics in the whiskey to start to evaporate and spread out. But the chimney shape also kind of traps them at the top. So they don't all evaporate out into the ether, but will stay there for your nosing. And then they continue to open up in the glass down in this wide base. So there are other styles of whiskey tasting glasses, and you can even use a rocks glass, of course, or a brandy snifter, or a good tulip-shaped wine glass. But in the industry, the standard has pretty much become using the Glencairn glasses. So well worth seeking out, and they're just very handy to have around. And they're very comfortable in the hand, and this sturdy base, they don't tip over. You have to make a real concerted effort to break one. I mean, you just really have to drop it on the floor. So they last you a really good long time.
I actually dropped mine today, Susan.
Yeah.
And I was on my kitchen floor. I was grabbing it and I went too quick, and God bless it. It's no breakage.
It must have landed on its base. So yeah, they're pretty hardy. I guess they're also made for people who drink a lot of whiskey and might lose their grip. I don't know.
Susan, if you don't mind, I wanted to show them this as well. This is something that Susan and I always kind of keep around. Just sometimes when you're nosing a whiskey and all the tips we just taught you, it might still be too strong. So what you can do, these are great little water droppers. And sometimes I just add a few drops of water into my bourbon just to break down the alcohol a little bit. But what it also does, it releases the fruit notes. So you can really delineate a little bit better on some of the fruit flavors and notes to enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So with that, Susan, I was going to show them how to do a little taste.
Very good.
Okay. So very similar to what Susan showed you on the aroma. I want you to take, especially because we're going to break down some flavors and then have some nibbles with it, just take a small taste and let it rest on your tongue. We call that kind of the Kentucky chew, and I'll kind of demonstrate. And then once I swallow, I blow out the alcohol. So you can, again, focus on the flavor. You will immediately notice that you can capture more of the flavor on your tongue by doing that. And again, I mentally walk through, do I taste spice, sweet, savory, earthy notes? And then as we're talking, the fourth way to judge a great whiskey is the finish. Susan and I like long, sweet, dry finishes. Sometimes a bourbon might leave you almost puckering, a little bit of astringency. Maybe it's too long in the barrel. Sometimes it's overly sweet or overly spicy, so you're reaching for a glass of water. So you're looking really for more balance, just warmth, not heat necessarily. Susan, do you have anything to add for the taste before we get into the Old Forester flavors?
I think just, again, to make sure that you let it coat your mouth a little bit. When I have done bourbon tastings for people, especially the ones where I'm standing at a bar for a big corporate event or something, and a person comes up to the bar and asks for a tasting and then just stands there and knocks it back, I think, well, you just missed 90% of what's going to go on in that whiskey. And I hesitate to say, but it's almost always men who do that. So, take your time, because that's how you're not supposed to drink lots. You're supposed to drink quality, not quantity. And so that's, appreciate it, enjoy it. And a glass will last you a while, an evening, or a bottle will last you for weeks or months rather than a bottle of wine, which you really have to drink within a certain time period. So whiskey is something to be savored.
It is something to be savored. And, Susan mentioned quality. And so with Old Forester, of course, this is one of my go-to bourbons, not only just for a simple tasting like we're doing today, but I think it's a great product for the price point. You know, Old
Absolutely.
Forester's always done a fabulous job. Of course, it's made with by Brown-Forman. And if you go through the steps we just talked about, you know, we see that beautiful amber appearance. But when you nose it, I really get a nuttiness from Old Forester, and undoubtedly on the fruit. And we'd love for you to type in if you get other things as we're talking, you know, please type them in. But I always get banana or banana bread with Old Forester, and undeniable caramel and vanilla is absolutely wonderful. And so when you look to pair food with a bourbon, you know, Susan and I came up with 3 ways to do it. What we call balance, counterbalance, and explosion. Now today is all about just creating balance. Balance is when you take one of a predominant flavor of the whiskey. So go ahead and taste it. You know, again, I get that banana, nutty, bready caramel. So it's very true, I think, Susan, to the character of the nose, you know, with Old Forester. So when I speak of balance, I mean taking a predominant flavor, and I chose nuts for this one, and that's why we asked you to have some pecans on hand, because all you're trying to do is bring harmony. You're not trying to fight the bourbon or overpower it with food. All you're trying to do is complement it. So after you have taken a little taste of it and some of those flavors that I speak to, you know, are identified, take one of your pecans and go ahead and pop it in your mouth and go chew on it a little bit before you take a sip of the bourbon. Chew on the pecan, you know, chew it a little bit, but before you swallow the pecan, take a little sip and allow it to marry a little bit, because you'll certainly appreciate it, and you'll be amazed how the pecan actually brightens as you take a sip of that Old Forester. It actually highlights it and celebrates it instead of overpowering it. I hope that you enjoyed that. Susan, how do you think?
Well, I think absolutely what it does is bring about that nuttiness and, of course, the oaky notes that come from that time sitting in the barrel.
Absolutely. And, you know, the nuttiness does reflect a barrel note flavor. You can also get nuttiness from the yeast. That is true as well. And fruit notes from the yeast.
Especially sweet nuts like hazelnuts can come from that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is very true as a heavy caramel, nutty, you know, and when I said banana bread, you know, if you really think of what, and some of you may do this, you may not, but when I make my banana bread, I always put walnuts or pecans in it. And so to me, this would be great to have a slice of banana bread with nuts and have this on the side of my Old Forester.
Perfect breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Breakfast of champions, actually.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, the next 2 that we're doing, again, are balance related, but I want to explain counterbalance. Counterbalance is when we take a complete opposite flavor. And I'm going to stay with my Old Forester for a moment. I take a complete opposite flavor of a food and an opposite flavor of the whiskey. So I mentioned I have a lot of caramel in my Old Forester. If I wanted to go completely opposite, I may do something spicy. It might be kind of a cayenne pepper, or maybe an Asian influence, like a heat, you know, something that has a lot of heat to it, Asian flavors. And the reason why that would be a counterbalance to Old Forester, but still complement, is because the caramel note, which is so rich and delicious in Old Forester, would actually douse some of the heat and spice of that Asian flavor or heat spiked flavor, you know, and so it plays nicely together. So that's an example of counterbalance. And then a final example of the way we do food pairings in the book is explosion. And explosion occurs when you take a predominant flavor again, but you really want to put it on steroids with the food. So I get some chocolate notes, you know, from Old Forester, and that's a really nice flavor. So if I took a bite of chocolate, and if you have some chocolate on hand, you can certainly try this. But take a bite of that chocolate and drink a little Old Forester with it, and it actually explodes the chocolate, which is delicious and one of my favorite ways to do it. So go ahead and take a bite of the chocolate with the Old Forester, and then we'll move on to the Larceny. So on Old Forester, we've taken Balance and we've taken Explosion. And with Larceny, we'll go back to Balance.
Oh, I might mention that in between our bourbons and bites, as we go to a new one, if you have a glass of water to hand, yes, oh, Edith is on it. I can see her there. Hi, Edith, one of our Bourbon Women members.
Oh, hi, Edith.
Yeah.
Oh, what a treat.
Ah, wearing the duds. Okay, great.
Love it. Edith, did you eat chocolate with the Old Forester? I hope.
Yeah. You're muted, so just nod. Okay.
That's great. All right, so hopefully you've enjoyed the pecan and you've enjoyed the chocolate with the Old Forester. So just take a little rinse of water in between so we can kind of go to the next one. And then let me grab my Larceny, which Susan introduced from Heaven Hill. Susan, I didn't know if you were able to find the mash bill from that.
I am paging through my book where I hope I made a note.
Well, that's fine.
Yep.
But the reason why we chose this one is going to be with honey. And as soon as you nose Larceny, as soon as you nose it, you get these little touches of honey. It's so much lighter to me. Do you agree, Susan, than the Old Forester?
It is. It's much lighter. I think part of that is the wheat, and it's actually a 92 proof bourbon. So it's several proof points higher than the 86 Old Forester. And I did find the mash bill here. It's 70%. Okay. Yeah, it's 70% corn, so it's a tiny bit less corn than Old Forester. 20% wheat and 10% malted barley.
All right, there we go. Yeah. And malted barley, by the way, just so you know, actually creates kind of cereal notes. You know, like granola, oatmeal.
Grape nuts.
Grape nuts. Oh, that's always a good one, Susan. You're right. Grape nuts are perfect description for malted barley. But Larceny, notice how I've stepped away from saying caramel because I don't get a lot of caramel. What I get more is vanilla from Larceny, which makes total sense to me because caramel's a heavier in the Old Forester and a lighter in the Larceny. I get a tad of nutmeg and maybe a tiny bit of cinnamon, but it's the honey that speaks to me. So if you have a little dollop of honey, or maybe you bought a honey stick, just, you know, scoop it up with a little spoon. We're not shy here on Zoom. If you want to just dip your finger, you know, in your honey, just go ahead and take a little taste and then taste that Larceny. And notice how, again, nothing's fighting each other, just plays so nicely so that it actually harmonizes. You know, that's always what our goal is to harmonize, you know, so you have a very flavorful meal. Because I'm sure even if you're a wine drinker and you order wine, you know, throughout a meal, you know the wines that just simply don't go with a particular food and it didn't heighten the food level. And so Susan and I really like to preach that you can actually pair bourbon throughout your entire meal. You never have to go to wine because bourbon is so complex with flavors. It's just taking the time to identify, you know, what those flavors are.
And think about the ways we are describing the whiskeys. We're using all food adjectives. So that should be a pretty good clue for you too.
You know, when we start seminars together, when we're traveling, sometimes I'll just ask the audience, you know, how many people out there actually like to eat? Well, of course, everybody raises their hand because we're all so familiar with, like Susan said, food flavors, food memory. If I took you mentally to your kitchen and I said, what's on your spice rack? You would immediately be able to identify, I know cinnamon, nutmeg, black pepper, you know, seasoned salt. You know, you can identify those, but for some reason, when we go to describe bourbon, people kind of get shy about it as if they don't know food flavors. And so that's where we try to break that myth that you don't have to be an expert to enjoy it. So let's go on to our next one. I'm going to reach for my Angel's Envy, which, as Susan explained, this is a little bit different because it's a finished whiskey. And Susan, do you want to again kind of explain the finished whiskey process or what it means to be a finished whiskey again? Because I think you'll appreciate more when you taste this, you know, what goes into it.
Right. There are actually several different ways of finishing whiskey. In fact, the standard method for aging Scotch almost makes it a finished whiskey from the get-go, because it's used bourbon barrels that are used for aging Scotch whiskey. You can only age a bourbon in a new charred oak barrel and still call it bourbon. It can only be used once. And if you think about, if you're getting 70% of the flavor of the bourbon from the barrel, well, it would be like using a tea bag more than once if you're really trying to extract the maximum flavor from that barrel. So rather than just throw out or burn the barrels, or of course around here a lot of times people have acquired used bourbon barrels to use as planters or furniture or whatnot, but the bourbon industry sells thousands of barrels a year to Scottish distilleries, and Scotch is almost all aged in used bourbon barrels, as is a lot of rum, as is Tabasco sauce. I think a lot of people don't realize that there's a little tiny bit of bourbon in your Tabasco sauce. So that's probably a good condiment to have with bourbon on the side.
It is, and I do have to say, you know, I remember getting into a very playful argument with a Scotsman because I was telling him, you know, bourbon, of course, has more quality than Scotch because we have the new car smell of the barrel. You know, we get the best of the barrel because it's brand new, you know, newly charred white oak, and, you know, sits in the barrel first. And then we go on to sell, you know, our barrels. And I knew this gentleman very well, so you'll appreciate what he said. We always used to joke with each other. And so I said, you all take those. I thanked him that day, and I said, thank you for taking the barrels off our hands, you know, once we're finished making our great quality bourbon. And in his big, thick Scottish accent, which I will not embarrass myself by trying to create a Scottish accent, but he said, well, Peggy, we want to thank you for washing them out.
That's great.
So I just thought that was very clever on his behalf, and told me never get in an argument with a Scotsman, right, over their Scotch.
Good point.
But back to our wonderful
secondary. Okay, so the way you find this in American whiskey, you either are looking at just a new barrel, a secondary barrel, you know, it's aged in its first barrel, and then it's going to be dumped, which is the term of art, into a second barrel. And various distillers will do different things with those second barrels. Sometimes there's a custom toasting and charring that you toast it to a certain level, or you will give it a different char or different combination of toasting and charring. And an example of that, of just playing around with the wood, is Woodford Double Oak, that after it's been in the initial aging, which is between 5 and 7 to 8 years, which is most Woodford and it's batched, then they will put it in a barrel that has been deeply toasted and lightly charred. Think about what you're doing. You're heating the wood first, that's the toasting, and then charring it is when you use the flames on the barrel. Now the toasting is where you're going to make that layer where you're caramelizing the wood sugars. So think about creme brulee, and you're caramelizing, it's kind of like the creme brulee of wood. You're releasing those wood sugars, and you're also caramelizing the compounds called vanillins in the wood, which of course are the vanilla notes that we get out of bourbon. So that's the toasting process. The charring will blister the wood. It's going to give it a lot of color as the whiskey moves in and out of the barrel. And the charring also, since it's blistered the wood, allows the whiskey to move in and out of the wood more easily. So a lot of distillers will then take a whole variety of maybe just a toasted barrel and put their whiskey into it secondarily. Or they might do, as Woodford Reserve does with their double oak, a dark toasting and a light charring. So they will leave it in there for anywhere from 6 to 12 months. And then there is a double oak, which is left in the secondary barrel for 2 years. And you can only buy that in smaller bottles at the distillery. But those are specialty ways of doing it. I know there's a local rye. My friend Jason Bronner at Bourbon's Bistro has started a rye brand called Buzzard's Roost. And not only does he work with a cooperage, a barrel maker, to make specific secondary barrels because he sources his bourbon from a big distillery, a commercial distillery in southern Indiana. But what he does to make it his own bourbon, he puts it in a secondary barrel, and he has a custom toasting and charring, and also he has the staves carved into wavy patterns inside the barrel so that he gets more surface area for absorption of the wood going in and out. And then finally, a way of secondary barrel customization, Maker's Mark. When they do Maker's 46, they have staves that have been cooked in a convention oven, toasted to a particular darkness, and the Maker's Mark is aged additionally with the addition of those extra staves. They put them on steel rings that makes it look like a giant key ring, and then the staves have holes in one end, and it really looks like a big key ring full of wooden keys. And that's how they do their private barrel selections as well. They actually have 5 different types of custom toasted staves. And when somebody like a retailer or a bourbon club is making a private barrel selection, they go to Maker's Mark and they taste samples of makers that have been secondarily aged with each of these different toasting staves. And they choose some combination of 10 staves from these 5 different styles. And there are 1,001 different styles they can choose from, 1,001 different combinations. So that's truly the definition of a custom barrel, I think. The other way to do that, and that's all just playing with the wood. The other way to do it is what Angel's Envy is doing, which is taking barrels that have held other spirits. And there are numerous distilleries that are now doing things like partnering with California wineries and using former Cabernet barrels, ex-Cabernet barrels. Angel's Envy uses ex-port barrels, Oloroso port from Portugal. I know in Scotland, the Scots have been doing secondary aging using a lot of different sherry and port finishes, even after they take them out of the bourbon barrels. I mean, after all, they're 100% malted barley, so they have to do something to mix up the flavors, right? It's not like they have these recipes with the multi-grain.
I have to venture to say, Susan, that Angel's Envy, in my opinion, was one of the first, distilleries in Kentucky to do finishes.
As far as I know, it's the first bourbon distillery to do finish.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And there many others have followed. And in fact, Angel's Envy for their rye whiskey uses rum barrels, which is interesting since so many rums are aged in bourbon barrels. Right. So who knows how many things are going into that secondary aging with the Angel's Envy.
It's really a fascinating innovation in our industry that's happening right now with finishes. So, Susan, it's so funny because you said you just wrote one for Leo, and I'm getting ready to write one on that topic for American whiskey.
Oh, very good. Okay. Yeah,
I'll have to steal your notes.
Steal my Leo article, Peggy. It's fine.
I'll have to steal your notes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, back to Angel's Envy. I couldn't help when I nose it, and please do, immediately get fruit notes, and I think it's because of that port sherry finish that I get cherry and cranberry and, raisin come to mind. And then take a little sip of it. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, you say the dark fruits that if you're a port drinker, you'll recognize immediately, I think.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. And so that's why we decided to ask you to bring, either Bing cherries, dried cherries, dark raisin, any of those as a food pairing, because again, it's going to complement. It's going to complement and make it taste even better and continue to bring those fruit flavors out. Now there's some other things. I get a little bit of spice, but not anything to write home about. It's certainly not black pepper. It'd be more like a white pepper. I definitely get some of the honey notes for sure, but predominantly for me, it was the cherry and fruit notes.
Absolutely. I'm going to try my cherry here.
Now, this is interesting because I see some questions coming in, but I would love to know before we open it up for questions, what was your favorite whiskey to drink today with the food? I'm just curious, what did you like the best? So type that in if you get a chance, and we'll have Hannah read them out to us. And if there's any other questions, or Susan, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just saw a question saying, what's the mash bill on Angel's Envy? And I mentioned earlier, but it was sort of in passing. It's the same, interestingly, as Old Forester and Woodford Reserve, which is 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley.
And you know, it doesn't surprise me in a sense that it's the same as Woodford, as you were talking, because the master distiller originally came from them.
Correct. You know? Yeah. Lincoln Henderson helped create the brands, or created the brand.
That's also who helped me train to become a master taster.
Right.
Well, Susan and Peggy, you are giving us the best reason ever to drink at work. So this is great. We did have a question of what if someone could define barrel proof. That's a term I'm also not familiar with. If you could define that term. And then the other question that we have is, what would be the ideal bourbon pairing for mild cigars and steak grilled over a campfire? So I'm going to leave both of those
Susan,
with you.
you take the first one, I'll take the second.
Oh, okay. Barrel proof. Distillers put bourbon into the barrel at a particular proof. It may not be what it is right off the still. In fact, they almost always adjust it down to a lower proof using distilled water than the alcohol concentration at which it came off the still. A lot of them like sort of lower proofs to put in the barrel. And as the bourbon ages, it will, a lot of water evaporates because water is a smaller molecule than alcohol, and it slips through the wood more easily. And especially at the top of a warehouse in these really hot Kentucky summers where the temperatures are going to be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. As that water evaporates out of the bourbon, as well as some alcohol evaporating out of the bourbon, the proofs get higher and higher. And they can reach up in the 120s, the 130s. And so there are a lot of bourbons now that are actually put in the bottle at barrel proof. So you can get a bourbon that's 110 to 130 proof. That's pretty high. That's definitely one that you want to add water to, because it does start to release all the flavors. And why would you even buy a barrel proof bourbon if you can't just drink it straight? Which you can if you have a liver donor lined up somewhere, who's on call. But what you want to do is add water to that bourbon, because it releases all these layers of flavor we've been talking about. And just what Peggy said about even adding a little water to a lower proof bourbon helps release many of the complex layers. If you buy a high proof bourbon and you can add your own water to it, well, you've just stretched the volume in that bottle of bourbon several times. Pappy Van Winkle, when he was one of the founders of Stitzel-Weller Distillery, and he always insisted that his whiskeys be bottled at 100 proof, even though at the time many other whiskeys were bottled at much lower proofs, again adjusting with distilled water, because he said, why pay for water? When you're buying a lower proof whiskey, the distiller has added the water, you can add your own water, right? So that's a really good reason to buy those higher proof bourbons. They'll last you longer, and a lot of times they're going to release just an amazing cascade of flavors with that water addition to them. But that's barrel proof. Did that answer the question? I hope.
And staying along that same lines of barrel proof, I think the question was, what would you pair with steak and a cigar? And so that's when Susan and I start thinking about, okay, what's the intensity that we're talking about? So, with a good grilled steak, it's very savory, it's red meat. It's not light and airy like chicken or fish, or, it's hearty. And then you think of a cigar, which of course has that nice smoky flavor to it and can have a variety of flavors as well, you know, whether it's a little bit of spice in the cigar or sweetness to the cigar, but you know it's powerful, right? So I would want to choose a bourbon that would stand up to those two big, bold flavors. So again, back on the same line of barrel strength, I would love an Elijah Craig barrel strength whiskey, or I would choose a Baker's or Booker's because those are very robust bourbons. They won't be faint in flavor. If you had a, you know, for example, a wheated bourbon, you know, that we just talked about, Larceny being light and airy and fruity, and, you know, I don't think that it would be able to stand up to that big bold steak and that big, you know, cigar. So you need something to complement.
Yeah. The Baker's is 107 proof, which is not quite barrel proof, but is very much up there. And of course, the Booker's is barrel proof, and it can be anywhere from, I've seen expressions anywhere from 126 to 135 or so. So
And
those,
Susan, at this point, we should probably go ahead and confess our love for barrel proof whiskey.
oh yeah. I was also going to add Old Granddad 114.
Ah,
Great with steak and cigars.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really
good
one.
question.
Yeah, but definitely we like the higher proof, bigger, more robust bourbons.
And you know, when we started Bourbon Women Association, that was one of the myths in the industry, is that women liked lower proof, sweeter, you know, approachable whiskey like that. And we've proved it wrong over and over. We'll be celebrating with Bourbon Women our 10-year anniversary next year, which we're really excited about. And we've done studies, blind tastings, research, every which way you slice it. Women during blind tastings will undoubtedly pick the higher proof, spicier, and more robust whiskey.
Looking for flavor.
Looking for complexity and flavor.
Yep.
I'm a vegetarian, but I'm about to go find myself the bourbons you recommended and the cigar to go with my impossible meat steak.
Great.
The other question we have, can you give recommendations for achieving the explosion test with Larceny and Angel's Envy?
Sure. So if I would do Larceny, or let's say Angel's Envy, because it's kind of that port sherry, you know, I would do something like a really dark chocolate bread pudding with tons of raisin in it, you know, with that nice caramel sauce over top of it. To me, I think that would be outstanding for explosion.
Yeah, or bread pudding with some dark cherries in it and caramel sauce.
Dark cherry, yes, something that would really highlight that dark raisin, dark cherry.
Yeah, Bourbon's Bistro has that on the menu, and that's a real winner. That's great. You don't even have to bother cooking it. Just go get curbside from Bourbon's Bistro.
That's right.
It's so great that we're still able to find their food pairings from our local restaurants through curbside pickup. You know, we can just still have that experience at home. And while we have both of you, before we conclude the program, you can answer this at any point. What are your favorite myths or misconceptions about bourbon? You mentioned something along the lines of, you know, you like to, you know, change people's minds about bourbon. So what are some of your favorites? You can answer that at any point, but that's all the questions we have for now.
Sure. I think the biggest one that I get when I'm speaking to someone who's not a bourbon drinker, and maybe they are Scotch or gin or vodka or whatever it is, they'll say, oh my gosh, no way will I touch bourbon. It is way too hot. It is way too strong. And I think the proof sometimes scares people off, but what they don't understand is how to break it down. And what I always like to do is introduce them to a bourbon cocktail, you know, like our famous old fashioned, you know, like a beautiful Manhattan, because it introduces to them in a slower way than just having a shot of bourbon right next to them and, you know, to having them take a sip. You know, it eases them into it. And then what I have noticed, and this is hands down what happens with a new bourbon drinker, they fall in love with the cocktails. And then they start getting a little picky about which bourbon goes in that cocktail, because I hear them say, ooh, I want to taste the bourbon more now. And so what happens is you graduate your flavors as you start to drink more and more and experience more and more bourbon.
Yeah, exactly. I also hear a lot that, oh, doesn't bourbon have to be made in Kentucky? Nope. We make 95% of it, but bourbon just simply has to be made in the United States. And there was a really good, well, of course, in 1964, there was a congressional declaration that stated that bourbon is a distinctly American product. And then the rules for making bourbon were codified. And interestingly, it was the trade agreements that we've made with other countries that mean that somebody can make a corn-based whiskey in another country, but they cannot call it bourbon. And most of them really don't bother to try because the way we make it, it's just so good. But
now I have to laugh at, I did see the next question pop up and they said, is there any food that you absolutely have not been able to put with bourbon that you have not liked? And there is only one that I can possibly think of. And I've done everything from vegetables to seafood to, Susan knows, I think I've donuts, I've paired everything.
Bourbon's great with donuts. Yeah.
Okra.
Okra, yeah.
Cannot do okra.
I can't do okra by anyway, but.
Exactly. Exactly.
I'd eat a Brussels sprout before I'd eat okra.
Well, there you go. And I'm sorry for, I can even pair with Brussels sprouts, but I'm sorry for any okra people that I have offended today.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's just that would be an odd flavor.
And I don't know if it's the texture more than the flavor that just doesn't work.
If you had said bourbon didn't pair well with Brussels sprouts, I was gonna, lose my mind because I love a good Brussels sprout. But Edith and I are both with you on okra does not.
I saw Edith. See, she knows me.
Yeah. If there are any other questions, everyone, please just let us know. But I've learned so much today.
We've had fun.
I can't wait to dig into your book.
Thank you.
I also want to add I would love to add a shout out to John and Janine, who I've worked with at Locust Grove before, and my friend Del Marie Vaccaro, who I see is on our call too. So hello.
If you didn't get a personal shout out from Susan Reigler, that just means that we want to get to know you better at Locust Grove. So consider becoming a member, and we'll be happy to see you more. But Susan and Peggy, any final words for us today?
I think I just want everybody, and I think Susan will agree, it's why we wrote the book. We want you to enjoy bourbon in your style, in your way, because that's how bourbon has always been approachable and friendly. And, we want everybody to be excited about it.
Exactly.
I love it. I love it so much. Thank you both of you for being with us. We're so pleased to have you. Thank you to all of our guests joining us today. It was wonderful to see your faces and see your names. I will send out an email later today that has the links that we talked about to our distillery event and to buy the book and to some other things at Locust Grove. We hope that we'll see you at Locust Grove again very, very soon. And our next lecture will be in October. So please stay tuned, and thank you all of us for being with you today. Happy Derby Week. Bye, everyone.
Happy Derby.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.